Hey, what's up everyone, it's Justin here, and today I've got the comparison for you between the Apple iPhone 6 and the iPhone 5S. The bigger and better iPhone is finally here for 2014, and in this video we will be putting these two devices to the test in order to help you ultimately decide whether it is worth the upgrade from your iPhone 5S or previous generations of Apple smartphones. But quickly talking about the specs, the iPhone 6 features an Apple A8 processor and the M8 Motion coprocessor with 1GB of RAM, and it is available in a 16, 64, or 128GB configuration and 3 different colors. On the other hand, the inside of the iPhone 5S features an Apple A7 processor with an Apple M7 coprocessor and 1GB of RAM, and is available in 16, 32, and 64GB configurations, also in 3 different colors. So let's not waste any time and let's get right into it. So the first thing I would like to talk about is hardware, and one of the most noticeable things between these two generations of devices is that the iPhone 6 is reasonably larger than its predecessor, and that is thanks to a screen size increase of 0.7 inches. The iPhone 6 comes in at 5.44 inches tall, while the iPhone 5S comes in at 4.87, and in terms of width, the 6 comes in at 2.64 and the 5S at 2.31. The 6 also weighing in at 27 grams more, but due to the size increase you really don't feel that at all, and with its form factor it actually feels lighter than the previous generation. From looking at the back of these devices, you will also notice that no longer do we have a glass bar on the top and bottom, and although when you take a closer look at the design, it kind of does have a much different approach to it. The principal design is definitely still there, and in a way I would describe the iPhone 6 being in a lot of ways the same but very different compared to its predecessor. On the top left of these devices, you will also find your cameras that is coated by a sapphire glass to protect it, and you will also notice that on the iPhone 6, the camera glass does protrude just a little bit. You have also got a dual LED flash on both of them, with the one on the iPhone 6 being round. In my personal opinion, when I first saw the leaks and the dummies of the iPhone 6, I definitely wasn't a fan of it at all, and I was hoping Apple would actually have glass on the top and bottom. But now that I look at the device itself, I think it looks absolutely great, and Apple has definitely pulled it off in the design category once again, and with the rounded edges to the screen, in general the device just feels extremely seamless, thin, and light in the hand. And when we measure these devices side by side, you also notice that the iPhone 6 is quite a bit thinner. It comes in at just 6.9 millimeters thick, while the iPhone 5S comes in at 7.6 millimeters. And again, with the kind of squared off design and edges of the iPhone 5S as opposed to the rounded edges and also the curved over screen of the iPhone 6, it definitely feels much lighter and thinner in the hand. You'll also notice that the power button has been relocated. Instead of having it on the top, now due to the larger display and form factor, Apple has located it on the right side that is accessible by your thumb or index finger, and I think it has been placed very well. On both these devices, you also have a feature that was first introduced on the iPhone 5S last year, and that is the Touch ID fingerprint unlocking, which is something I've pretty much come to take for granted. So now that we have talked about the hardware, let's touch base on the display. The iPhone 5S features a 4-inch 1136 by 640 resolution 326 ppi display. On the iPhone 6, you've got a 1334 by 750 resolution 326 ppi 4.7-inch display, what Apple calls the Retina HD display. And although I was kind of disappointed at first that the ppi resolution wasn't bumped up at all, from looking at the display, I really can't complain. It is still extremely sharp, the color representation is great, and the extra screen real estate is definitely appreciated. And a great feature that they have implemented that a lot of people with the iPhone 6 Plus would take advantage of is if you're in an app and you can't reach the top, you can just double tap on the home button, not click, and that will bring it down so you're able to reach it and bring it back up. So for people like me with rather small hands, it just makes things so much easier while you're trying to reach the corners of your device. When it comes to the software, of course, both of these devices do run Apple's iOS 8, with the iPhone 6 shipping with it initially, with iOS 8 bringing some moderate improvements to the large overhaul iOS 7. So now it's time to talk about the camera, and I'm actually very curious to see how this test will go over. What really baffled me at the announcement is that Apple didn't bump up the megapixel count on the camera of the iPhone 6. The 8 megapixel stayed, and it seems like they have made quite a few improvements to the camera, but on the spec sheet we didn't really see that at all. There's now things like phase detection autofocus, a better stabilization system, but here's just a look at some of the photos I took side by side with the iPhone 5S. So from taking a look at these photos, you will see that the differences are actually pretty small, but In some of the photos, you were able to notice it a little bit better than others in terms of the way it was able to focus and process the image. And although the megapixel has always been kind of low on iPhones compared to other Android phones out in the market, in the past few years, I've definitely noticed I'm able to get the most consistent images out of the camera on the iPhone. And I have to say, from some of these pictures, I can definitely notice the improvement from the iPhone 6 camera compared to the iPhone 5S. Both devices are also able to record full HD 1080p video, with the iPhone 5S being able to record 120 frames per second slow motion, and the iPhone 6 able to record 240. Battery life was a huge issue for me on the iPhone 5S. Using it as a daily driver, I wasn't able to get it through a day most of the time comfortably. So one of the biggest things I have been wishing upon of the iPhone 6 is a larger battery. And this time around, they have bumped it up to an 1810 mAh battery as opposed to the 1540 mAh battery we saw on the iPhone 5S. And although that isn't as big of an improvement as I would have liked, you can see here that I am already getting a much better performance in the battery life on the iPhone 6. So it's great that we have seen an improvement, and hopefully in some future software updates, Apple is able to continue to push out more battery life out of their devices. So the last thing I always like to look at is the benchmark scores, and they aren't necessarily that important, but it's always great to give you kind of a representation of how the hardware inside these devices stack up, especially if you're comparing to iPhones. On both these devices, you do have 1 GB of RAM, with the iPhone 6 featuring an Apple A8 processor clocked in at 1.4 GHz and the Apple A7 processor clocked in at 1.3 GHz on the 5S. Moving on to the 3D Mark graphics test, we scored 17,328 on the iPhone 6 and 15,040 on the iPhone 5S. On a Wi-Fi test on the exact same network, testing them one at a time, the iPhone 6 came out with a score of 55.96 and 3.35 up, while on the iPhone 5S we got 46.16 and 3.35 on up as well. Moving on to the SunSpider browser benchmark, we scored 358 milliseconds on the iPhone 6 and 467 milliseconds on the iPhone 5S. So now it's time to jump to my final conclusion. I have to say the iPhone 5S was obviously a phone that was very great, but I wasn't able to recommend it to everybody as an upgrade, for example, if you had an iPhone 5. The iPhone 6, however, is a whole different story. The device is completely redesigned, and for the larger display itself, I would think that is a huge reason to upgrade. Personally, I have been using it for 2 days now, and I'm absolutely loving it and wish Apple had done something like this earlier. I feel the 4.7-inch form factor is perfect, and if you have the chance, I definitely say go for it and upgrade to the iPhone 6. But aside from that, be sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed this video and subscribe for some future content that is coming up in the next few days, and I'll see you all in the next one.